All right, welcome to the quiz over lessons 3.10 through 315. This is a practice quiz here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to plot these 2 points. Let's see, what color am I writing in? Blue, that works. So I'm going to go 3 in the real direction and 2 in the imaginary direction. So I go 1, 2, 3, and then up 2. If I wanted to be fancier, I would have fancy graph paper. So 3 plus 2i is what I just graphed. Then I'm going to go 4 in the negative real direction and up 1 in the imaginary direction. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, up 1. Right there, there's an invisible 1 in front there. So it would be negative 4 plus I would be that point. Then I was like, hey, what if we added those together? When we add them together, we get the real part added to the real part, so that'd be negative 1, and the imaginary part added to the imaginary part, so that would be 3i. Negative 1 plus 3i would be adding those two together. Now we're going to simplify these square roots. We don't think about this as the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 49. The reason why I split it up that way is because the square root of 49 is a perfect square, so I can take the square root of it. That's 7, and then the definition of the square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of negative 1, square root of 17. And I can't take the square root of 17, so I just call it the square root of 17 and then times I. Next one, I'm going to multiply these two together, multiply the, and just really think of the I as like an X. So like I times I is I squared, X times X is X squared. So it'd be 8 and then I squared. I squared is negative 1. And we get negative 8. I wrote these definitions up on the board. I is equal to I squared is negative 1, I cubed is negative I, and I to the fourth is positive 1. So I can just use that one right there. So this would be negative 12i would be the answer to part D. All right, when I take the square root of each side of the equation, I have to think about two answers working, and that'd be plus and minus 5. Over here, when I take the square root of each side, I'm taking the square root of the negative and the 36. So it'd be x is equal to, the square root of 36 is 6. Kind of like up here, I took the square root of 49. I can take the square root of 36, so it'd be 6, and then the square root of the negative part is I, so it'd be plus or minus 6i. Over here, I can't take the square root of the 7, so I just leave it the square root, so I write plus or minus square root of 7 times I. When I take the negative out, that's the I business. That's the whole first page. Second page is a subtraction. Now, the difference between addition and subtraction is really, the process is basically the same. You just got to pay attention to your negatives. Pretend that there's a negative 1 in front here. Distribute the negative through. So we get 10 plus 5i minus 8 minus 2i. Put the real part with the real part and the imaginary part with the imaginary part. So we got what, 2 plus 3i. The next one, pretend that there's a negative 1 in front. And I really encourage you to write this down. 3 plus 3i minus 4 minus 7i. Put the real part with the real part. So you borrow $3 from your aunt, $4 from your uncle. You owe them 7. And then we owe 7. We pay back 3. So we still owe 4. So that's the answer for that one. Okay, now we're multiplying. We have to remember that I squared is negative 1. So when we multiply this out, there's nothing more. That's supposed to be a 4. It's a bad 4. We're just out first, outside, inside, last, like we've done a whole bunch of times. 24 plus 32i, and then this one would be 6i and 8i squared. Those go together to make 38i. And then we need to think about this part here as I squared is negative 1. So this really acts like negative 8. So negative 8 with the real part of 24 would make 16. So it's 16 plus 38i. The next one here, it's the same thing. It just has, this has all positives with it. So this one here has a negative with it. So it just gives you a chance to make sure you're doing that all right. Multiplying by 1 is easy. So it's just 2 minus 7i. Then we do what, 10i and negative 35i squared. So this part goes together to be 3i. And then this part right here, well, that's negative 1, but that's negative. So it's going to act like a positive 35. With the 2 in the front makes 37. So 37 plus 3i. Next would be just distributing. So basically there's like a plus 0 right there. And so when you multiply by 0, everything goes away. So we don't really need that there, but it really is the same thing. It's simpler because it doesn't have a number with it. So I just can distribute. So we get 8i plus 12i squared. I squared is negative 1. So this acts like a negative 12. So it's negative 12 plus 8i. And the last one here is a pattern that we talked about. I to the 4th is 1. I to the 8th is 1. I to the 12th is 1. I to the 16th is 1. So all multiples of 4 are 1 when you have the I business. So that's why I was like, hey, split this up with 28 and 1. So I to the 28th, I to the 1st. Well, that means that I to the 28th is just 1 because it's a multiple of 4. So 1 times I is just I. So the final answer is I. And that's the entire practice quiz broken down and live for you so you can see what that's all about. All right, good luck on the quiz and peace.